Jimmy's coming back.
Jimmy's on the committee, right?
He's here. He's in.
He just ran to the bathroom.
Yeah.
He's up there. Okay. Yeah.
Plus E, so that should be on the agenda.
Okay. We're going to call this meeting to order. This is the Finance Committee, Subcommittee of the Holyoke City Council. My name is Joe McGivern. I act in the capacity as chair, thanks to our president, Todd McGee, who is to my left, far left. Next to Todd is City Councilor at Large Peter Tallman. To my right, City Councilor at Large Jim Leahy, and then City Councilor at Large Mike Sullivan. We also have other city councilors with us. Linda Vacan from Ward 5 to my far right, Gladys LeBron Martinez, Ward 1. In front of me, Ward 4, Councilor Josie Valentine, and Councilor Dave Bartley, Ward 3, next to our favorite media person, Mike Boisance from the Republican, who doesn't want me to introduce him. We have a number of special guests, including our mayor this evening. This meeting is designed purposely to get to a transparent answer to an issue that's been before us for the past several months. Part of it is when we found out we could not balance this year's current budget because we could not get the free cash certified by the state for a number of different reasons of items that needed to be reconciled, some from, I believe, what we're going to find out from previous years. And when we learned of that, thanks to the mayor, who, our chief financial officer and mayor, the city immediately hired an independent analysis team to look at some of this. They are with us this evening, and they will be making a presentation shortly. And also with us are representatives from Melanson and Heath, who is our, as most people know and recognize, as the city outside auditor, independent outside auditor of the books. We also have our Bellamy. I don't know why we keep saying acting, because you just keep coming back and back and back. But Bellamy Smith is the city auditor at the moment, as a mayoral appointment to fill in while the city council does their bit in terms of filling that vacancy. Speaking of auditors, to my far left in the audience is the magic man we know as Brian Smith, the former city auditor, now resident of the city of Holyoke. Brian, it's always good to see you, and Dave Martins, who is our former purchasing director. To our far right is our city treasurer, Sandy. Sandy has been first term, but has been with the office for a number of years, and our new city purchaser, Lori Belanger, is sitting with her. Besides the mayor's aide, Rory Casey, and I think I've caught just about everybody, and we're all going to have what I believe is a good roundtable, transparent discussion to put everything in front of us. And then if I could set the tempo, what I'd like to see, all questions and answers be answered that are possible this evening, or get the answers, very shortly after tonight. That when we get an idea of where we are, let's find out short term where we have to go to get back on track in terms of the balanced budget. I know Bellamy sent some good news that I believe the free cash has been certified. No? All right, Bellamy's going to be very shortly telling us the free cash is certified. But that's not what tonight's about. That's what we want to get to. That's our goal. But to get there, I think it's very important that not just we, the city council and the mayor, but all residents of the city of Hoyoke, get their answers in terms of what's been for several, 3 or 4 months, several weeks, a weekly, headline in the media. And I think it raised a lot of questions, and people want to know what's going on. So that's what tonight is about. Try not to my fellow city councilors, to get off on tangents if you can. We do have all evening, but we do have one thing we have to take into consideration is Dan Sullivan is from Clifton, Larson, and Allen, is here from the eastern part of the state. Not only does he have to get home this evening, we don't want him heading into the storm, and make it an unbearable ride home. So they will be first with item number 2 on the agenda. After the question and answer period, where we're going to go into a lot bigger discussion on items 3, more broader discussions on items 3 and 4, Mr. Sullivan will be leaving us, so just keep that in mind. Now that I talked too much, our first item is minutes. The chair will accept the motion for previous minutes.
Make a motion to table the previous minutes.
Any discussion first?
Well, one would be the fact that we tabled the last minutes because we never received them. Those are supposed to be on the agenda. So we should just note that so that we're tabling last and this one.
Okay, so noted. We are tabling 2 sets of minutes, which should be available at our next regular meeting. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Item 2 is an order to introduce myself and President and Councilor McGee, that the auditing firm of Clifton, Lawson, and Allen appear before the City Council Finance Committee with their findings. Dan, could you come forward? I think we can get you at a desk or the mic, whichever is more comfortable for you. But
Doesn't matter. Either one. So
okay. The seats aren't that hot. Come on in. I apologize too. Most everybody in the audience, and I told Dan and Pat from Melanson and Heath, we are televised live, and that is also how we record our meetings. So we are, by open meeting law, supposed to announce that at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you. Dan Sullivan, Clifton, Lawson, and Allen, we welcome you, and we look forward to a very enlightening presentation.
thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And
Get the mic on the button.
Sorry, hit the button that
Button in
goes
the front.
green.
There you go.
Got it. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here in front of the council, the finance committee, and go over this report. We were hired to be able to come in and assist with the reconciliation process of cash between the treasurer's cash books and the city auditor's general ledger, and then to also look at specifically, because it was already identified that there were some issues related to the way the health insurance withholdings and the related expenditures through the payroll process was being handled by the automatic accounting system, the Munis accounting system, and to take a specific look at that also, because it was suspected, and as we go through here, correctly so, that it was causing logistical problems in the way that cash was being recorded on the GL, which then required a number of manual adjustments to be able to get that in order. So we came in, and in my executive summary, I think the first thing that was important to state is that in the end, cash is reconciled between the general ledger and the treasurer's cash book as of June 30th, 2017. And based on the reconciliation procedures that we performed, and what we, just to let you know, we went through every single month from July of 2016 through June of 2017, and went through and reconciled every single transaction that was recorded on the Munis General Ledger to what was recorded on the treasurer's cash book, identified each and every variance, and that's why we were able to report that we found all the variances, and the reasons for most of them was either, majority of them were timing differences. There were real transactions booked on the Munis General Ledger, real transactions that coincided with what was recorded on the treasurer's cash book, but they were booked in two different periods. And mostly it was, one was booked in prior to June 30th, and some of them were booked on the other set of the books in July, August, even up into September on the general ledger. And I'll go into that a little bit further. And then the other pieces of the problems that was causing with the variances between the cash, between the two books, was related to some misunderstandings of how Munis was handling the recording of transactions through the automatic transaction processes, mostly through the payroll process. So at the start of the engagement, we were handed the general ledger, we were handed the treasurer's cash book, and there was a variance, and these variances were made up of multiple things. A lot of them were identified to us by city personnel, by the external auditors, to a lot of the degree. Some of the amounts weren't totally quantified at that point, all the way through June 30th, but they knew what the issues were. And then, but in the end, after we went through our process, we were able to fully reconcile. I have a few findings that I'd like to go over with you. And the first one is just talking about when we picked up the general ledger balance had approximately $94 million of treasurer's cash, and the cash book had $113.5 million. And so the variance of about $19.1 million was the treasurer's cash book was higher than the general ledger. So we went through the process each month to figure out what caused that. And in the end, it was made up of really a handful of like transactions. The first one being the timing difference that I referred to prior. At year end, at June 30th, Mass General Law allows a city, town in Massachusetts to be able to keep their accounts payable open through July 15th. And what that means is they can continue to book warrants. All the departments send in all their bills. You try to make sure that every single thing that was expended, received goods or services in that fiscal year, get recorded against the budget for that fiscal year. And so you keep those open. But what happened is through the Munis accounting system, when they recorded those, it actually not only booked the expenditure, but it didn't hang out there as an accounts payable. It actually dispersed it too in fiscal year 17. So cash went down. But the warrants weren't handed over to the treasurer to pay until July. And in the city of Holyoke, one of the things that you actually kept booking these warrants after July 15th into July, August, and a little bit into September. But each time the general ledger was hit as of fiscal year 17 of cash, and that was to the tune of $19.3 million. So the transactions were real, the expenses were recorded in the same period, it's just cash was not recorded in the right period as being dispersed. Treasurer had it correctly recorded in fiscal year 18 as being dispersed, and the general ledger was showing it as being dispersed in fiscal year 17. So it was a timing difference that once we just corrected it by reducing cash and booking an accounts payable, then they were reconciled for that piece of the variance. The other variance, main variance that caused it was related to this, what I was referring to is the way health insurance withholdings and health insurance expense related to those withholdings were being recorded on a regular basis throughout the year on the general ledger through the automatic accounting system that you're using as Munis. So what happened is about $8.2 million of withholdings were recorded as being dispersed when they actually should have just been hanging out in the liability, the withholding liability account that would get dispersed when you actually paid the bills to the insurance companies. And then, in the same sense, the bills that you paid to the insurance companies were then also not being recorded because of, again, a quirk with the system and a misunderstanding how to correct that. And that was $10 million going the other way. So they were looking at about $2 million. And then the last piece that was a main issue was there were these similar type of issues in the prior year, timing differences, misunderstanding of how things get booked in fiscal year 16, to the tune of about $2 million, and those had yet to be booked onto the general ledger. And then there was a few minor things, about $85,000 of some issues related to disbursements that just weren't, again, confusion of how to book them, that didn't get booked. And then lastly, one journal entry at the end, which was definitely related to the effort to try to fix these issues with this health care, the health insurance withholding and expense, but just didn't quite do it. Coming down to equaling to the dollar, to the penny, the $19,149,489.50 variance. And so in a nutshell, it was all identified, knowing, and things that can be remedied going forward. And I think that's pretty much, it's there was a lot of work put into this, and to come down to an executive summary report, though, it does really end up serving it right. It's 12 months of a lot of different things that went on, but when it comes down to it, it was the same culprits every single month that was causing this issue.
Excuse me. Thank you, Dan. We're going to go into a question and answer period, as we talked about, and I appreciate your presentation, and I appreciate the format of your presentation, so we kind of stay on a good level of understanding. I heard something, and I think it was either you and I, or maybe Bellamy and I, about the health insurance issue and Munis being part of the problem. Can you, if that's...
Sure.
Elaborate on that.
What happened, I think, it might have been right around 2014 or 2015 with the Affordable Care Act. One of the requirements of the Affordable Care Act was that employers had to report on the W-2s, the total health insurance expense, both the employer share and the employer share of an employee's benefits. And not only Holyoke and a lot, all the cities and towns that I've worked with and that actually use the Munis accounting system, went to Munis and said, hey, can you make this work for us? Is there something that we can, key into the settings that will generate this information automatically for us for our W-2. I think the first year, everybody almost like did Excel worksheets, figured it out. They actually went into every single W-2 and did it. Munis said, yeah, we can figure this out, and they did. But the settings had, and I've seen exactly what happened in Holyoke, I've seen in other places where the settings were doing things that we didn't quite know what they were doing. And so therefore it was booking the expense. And then when we got the bill, we didn't know how to book the expense again because we couldn't hit the same budget line twice and how it was all working. So it's I could get up here and bore you to death with T accounts, how it was all working, but it really was a logistic problem that I think once, it was difficult to see the forest for the trees of the way it was happening and fix it correctly.
In any of these variances, discrepancies that you've identified, and some were identified even before you took over your analysis of the situation, are they resolved now to a point where we can go forward?
Well, the health insurance one, we actually, as part of our engagement, assisted the city in going into the municipal system and changing the settings so that on the very next payroll, it will handle the cash aspect and the expense aspect of the health insurance withholding, the health insurance expense related to payroll correctly in the manner that the city wants to have it done. And I think I saw the treasurer, and I think the first payroll was run just this week, and with a couple minor glitches that we have to just probably tweak. She said it worked the way that we had said it would, and it looks like then that issue will be put to rest moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you. Councilor Leahy.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Jim Leahy, very nice to meet you. Excellent presentation. I just had a couple of quick questions in regards to settings and whatnot, because that does seem to be a culprit of things. So the city of Holyoke, are we going to be liable for any overpayment or underpayment for any city employee because of any of the settings?
Oh, there was no issue with in the context of this. There was no issue with what was being withheld.
Okay.
Sorry if I made that sounded. It was the general ledger postings,
Okay.
and they were temporarily in the wrong spot. That needed on every single payroll just needed to be moved around.
Okay.
But it was mostly all related to just cash and liability accounts, but related to any of the employees and the amount that the city is actually required for. One of the things we did look at, we analyzed the health insurance bills and the amount that was hitting the expense and the amount that was hitting against the withholding liabilities account was the correct ratio in accordance with the union, with the agreements.
My last question on that is, since the changing of the tax law, I noticed that, in the beginning, I think the first pay period of February, my paycheck was different than, the past. Do we have to make different settings in Munis for that?
Those were being made, those should have already been made. That's why you're seeing the change.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Sullivan.
Thanks. No relation, Dan?
No relation.
Are you talking about Mike Sullivan or Dan Sullivan?
Either way.
Same haircuts, though.
Oh, boy. Okay. Dan, there's $1,988,000 unposted audit adjustment from fiscal year 16. How does something drag on through fiscal year 17 and you're halfway through 18 and we're just turning it up now? And how did that affect what really happened in 17?
I don't know the exact answer. It might be timing. And probably I'm probably not the right person to speak about those logistics. My role was to quantify it and to report it, but I don't know exactly what happened related to that not getting posted. There was a couple, there were two major reconciling items with there. That one was to book some, a cash receipt that came in, and the other one was also like $600,000 was related to the same issue related to the health insurance. But I do not know the answer why that was not recorded on the general ledger by the time fiscal year 17 was completed at June 30th.
Okay, so does that now change the numbers we've seen from fiscal year 17? Is there something?
No, well, in related, it possibly would change something that's out in the non-general fund funds, because I think there was one amount that was related to that, and the other was related to liabilities. So related to fund balance, there was very little impact to the general fund balance related to this $2 million unposted amounts. It was, most of it was all related to non-general fund activity.
Okay, so it's, generally speaking, it's not something that's hitting our P and L for fiscal
No.
18.
And when you say, you're talking about your balance sheet that you submitted to the Department of Revenue just recently? Is
Right.
that what you're referring to? Because your financial statements were presented correctly, because the auditors made these, proposed these entries, and they were made for the financial statements. So it's not going to impact your audited financial statements. These were already booked. Related to the balance sheet, I didn't look at what the balance sheet numbers were submitted for fiscal year 16. I'm assuming that they weren't on that, but it depends on what the timing was that you did submit the balance sheet. But I did look through all the entries, and there was no material amount that was going to change the general fund, which would impact your free cash.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Deanna, are we missing any money? Are we missing any money?
We found every single transaction between both the general ledger and the treasurer's cash book. They were all real transactions that went through the system of internal controls of generating those transactions, through the warrant process, through the cash receipt process, departmental turnovers, et cetera. So both sets of books in the end agreed 100%.
That question was from a number of people who I meet on the street and ask me that question.
Yeah, no, it's...
Councilor Reagan.
Thank you. Thanks for coming down and sharing this information with us. It had been brought to our attention that the insurance posting issue was known at the time of audit last year relative to the problems with the munis. And I understand that you've changed the system as of this month, but we're about 9 months into this fiscal year. Mm-hmm. So is it safe to assume the first 9 months have the same problems in the system that the last year you just went through had?
Yes.
So do you have a level of confidence that the staff in the city have the ability to fix that before the end of this year, so that we won't have to bring in another firm to reconcile again?
Yes, and our engagement does include staying with the city on a consulting basis, not probably to the degree that we did for reconciling fiscal year 17. We did agree that we would reconcile July and August to see what was going on into fiscal year 18, and then be able to provide training and assistance in understanding how to do it with the existing staff, and so that you would get all these things resolved for fiscal year 18.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us how much your engagement to do the research cost and how much the continuing engagement will be?
I forget what the total engagement was. It was, how much
Pardon?
was it? About 40,000, I think. We estimated at 40,000, and we had different rates for the different levels of people that would work on it.
And will that include this other part, or is that a
Yes, yep,
separate
nope,
part?
we should be able to have enough on the budget to carry this all the way through. Yeah, I think we did a pretty good job of estimating this.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to recognize, joining us is now Councilor Dan Bresnahan, City Councilor at Large in the back. There are 10 city councilors here this evening, which I very much appreciate all of you, the attention to what we think is a very important issue, and I think most of the people that elect us think it's a very important issue. Just one note, Councilor Lisi does had a family commitment and does send the regrets that she could not be here this evening. Is there any further questions of the findings? Councilor LeBron Martinez.
Most of your consulting was to kind of reconciliate the books. Was there any findings of additional funds that would help our deficit at all?
No, we found, all the monies were there. All what we did is made sure that the two sets of books, the treasurer's cash book and the general ledger, were both reflecting those transactions in the same fiscal year. So what ends up being reported on your financial statements for fiscal year 17 will be everything that's already been accounted for that I know of.
I tried, guys. I'm sorry. Thank you.
The chair would ask the committee indulgence. We have two more orders that kind of pertain to everybody else that is here, but we have a number of people in the audience, department heads and people that are, part of the city and part of this whole process. Should we open up for questions? I'm sure Dan would be happy to answer anybody's question if there's anything that we haven't thought of asking.
Make a motion, open up to the general public.
On that motion, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Mayor Bellamy, we also have, we have some more discussion to do on the next two orders, but is there any questions that you have, Sandy, Lori, that we have not asked, or anything you'd like to bring to our attention? Dave Martins is a blast from the past, but one of our favorite city employees for 40-something years.
Can I go to Mike?
Just make sure the mic's on, Dave, please.
Say address.
Just a quick question, because you said this is the summary report. Where is the full report?
Well, the engagement was to actually do the reconciliations, not really required to write a report. So this may be the total report. We have work papers that are huge that went through the whole process. They don't fit quite in the format that you would want as a report. And then the report wouldn't say anything more than this. It could list, I could list every single month's reconciliation items, but they were total to this. So this is.
I just found that all due respect, and I thought you did a good summary report. I'm a little disappointed in the fact that you're not involved in this particular matter. There was nothing in that report for $40,000. There's nothing that says we need to correct A, B, and C, and D in our process.
Yeah, well, actually, we are reporting those. We do have actually, by the end of the engagement, we will have things for fixing these, such as, fixing the whole issue with the health insurance.
I'm not talking.
We wrote that up and we sat down, taught it, and then made the fixes for it.
I'm more concerned is from the expenditure of $1 all the way through the system. There's nothing in your report that addresses that at all for $40,000.
Oh yeah, we were not hired to do
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
That would cost you more.
Everything costs us.
Sorry.
Any other questions at the moment? Dan, is there anything, and I think David's question was fair, is there anything you have to offer to the city at this point, short term, what we need to do immediately? I think, all recognize, the mayor and everybody in this room, that we have some long-term issues that we have to deal with. Tonight, we're not going to resolve the long-term issues, but this is the beginning by looking at the short term and putting ourselves in creating a foundation to be able to, I think, do some serious changes in the way we handle finances in the city. But is there some short-term advice you could give us in terms of what we need to do immediately?
I think the reconciliation process of cash is probably one of the most important internal control procedures that any organization can do, and should never be something that is allowed to, I think, go on the way that it went during this time period. If there are issues reconciling at the end of every single month, I think the city should do everything to resolve that before the end of the next month. And I think if you adopt that policy and those procedures to be able to manage that policy, then you will never find yourself in the situation again. And I think it's so important. And then after you leave the cash, the next one is the receivables, to make sure that those are reconciled on a timely basis throughout the whole year, month by month, quarter by quarter. Because as you can see, what happens when you don't, it's extremely disruptive to the other processes that the city has, such as, having your tax recap filed, getting your free cash certified, all the things that really are very important to be able to run, for running the city. So keep it simple, keep it basic, and make sure you don't go from one month to another not having cash reconciled. And part of the process that we'll be doing for the next year is just coming in to make sure that that month is reconciled. We won't be doing it, but we'll be reporting back to say it's good, or you've got troubles. And so you'll know that ahead of time. And that was part of that was written into the engagement, which I think that was very proactive to be able to make sure that not only do we resolve what happened in 2017, but we make sure that we have some process to make sure it doesn't continue into the future.
Councilor Brown Martinez?
Any training that you can recommend or that you think the staff may need in order to better them develop even better, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is trainings with that are provided from your Munis accounting systems company, Tyler. They have conferences, they have webinars. You definitely should be, the people working with the system should definitely be making sure that they're staying up on the education that's provided to them. Participation in the accounting and auditing, Massachusetts Accounting and Auditing Society, which does lots and lots of training. Not only should your city auditor be going to those, but in many cases, in many cities and towns, the assistants do, and the same thing, the treasurer collectors have the exact same thing, and there's a lot of great training there, and it's at a very reasonable price to be able to do that. And you get to interact with all of the other treasurer collectors, city auditors, town accountants throughout the state. So there's a lot of things. If everybody in the finance departments are active within the associations that they belong to, that will go a long way.
Thank you.
Councilor Sullivan?
Thanks, Dan. So with you looking over everybody's shoulder and everybody on the right track now, when do you think we can close our books in the coming year and certify free cash?
This is just one piece of it. So I can, if we go through this process, cash will not be one of the problems. There's other factors that could. I think it's important to make sure you're fully staffed in your finance departments to be able to do that also. And but if you stay on top of these things, you should be able to close your books in late summer, fall, issue, your financial statements, audited in the fall, and, be having this all done by December 31st, easily. And that's probably the lion's share of most, cities comparable to, you've got $220 million of revenues and expenditures flowing through this. If you have the right infrastructure, there should be no issue in being able to do that.
Well, December 31st, we try to get the tax bills out before then.
Yep.
It seems to me that if everything's on track, like you say, we should be able to knock this off, like you said, late summer.
Late summer, fall, yep. Yeah, your free cash should be able to be certified by September. October, and anything right around there.
Okay.
Yep. And then see, when you go through those process too, then it's your books are in good shape, and which it makes it a very much more efficient audit when the auditors come in. And that's what I was pretty much saying, December 31st. That would be pretty much you try to get everything done related to your audit and stuff even by then. If you're a well-run fiscally, with the right amount of staffing and people knowing what they're doing, you should be able to have your audit done, have your free cash certified late July, early, in the fall, and have your audit done. You have your single audits done, and everything, is finalized. So it shouldn't be any issue. I could see Holyoke being able to do that.
Okay, so I'll hold you to September 30th. That sounds
Hopefully.
good. Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome.
Councilor Valentine.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in tonight and for further explaining the findings and the situation we're in. In layman's terms, for folks at home, where are the faults, errors, and gaps?
A lot of it was, I think, lack of experience a little bit near the end of trying to pull this all together.
Lack of experience from where?
From probably more on the general ledger side of understanding how to understand what the numbers were in the general ledger.
Can you explain to folks at home who runs the general ledger, who's in charge of it?
That would be the city auditor's office.
Okay. Anything else you want to add?
I mean, that's the main, that was the main issue. If you look at the different issues we had here, the timing was not a problem on the treasurer's cash book. It was the timing of when it was recorded on the general ledger. The activity related to the health insurance was recorded correctly on the treasurer's cash book, but not on the general ledger. Now, yes, there was some automated things going on, but a city auditor's office is responsible for seeing that, resolving it, figuring out whether you're doing it manually because you're going to keep the settings the same, or you go, hey, I should fix these settings. And so it took a long time for that to happen, and really, us to come in and actually be able to try to, provide the guidance to be able to make that happen. So those were the major things. Other than that, when it really came down to it, things were being recorded. You guys it was working. That's why, unfortunately, because of these things and letting it move on, it made something look a lot worse than it ever even was. This was molehill into a mountain, relatively unnecessarily. And so I think a lot of people felt that, there was some real severe problems going on. It really came down to just a handful of transaction types that caused this.
I mean, when you have a scorching resignation letter that makes it into the media that pretty much recommends that the city needs to go into financial receivership, I think it's obvious that people are going to panic and overreact. And so I appreciate you saying in layman's terms what the findings were and what one of the biggest problems was, because I think people need to hear that. It needs to be in an open setting like this, so that when the media is doing their coverage, which they do well, that is part of the conversation as well. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Counselor Dahlman.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for coming down and explaining this to us. I mean, I got the email, and plus I got a printed copy of the report. What you went through in the past, I don't know, how long, how many months you been here?
I think we started late December.
December,
Yep.
okay. Is this unusual for a community, for what you actually did to looking into it and the findings? Is it unusual?
No, surprisingly, no.
Okay.
You know, I've done this many times before, and so it does happen, and a lot of it's just because there's a number of different reasons. It could be turnover, it could be temporary absences, it could be just lack of the right person in the right job. There's many different reasons, but you're not alone in this situation. And I've also been in the situation where nothing was going, there was no fraud, there's no issues, it's just really based on accounting.
Okay.
And I've actually sat in a city auditor's positions too before, and I've struggled sometimes with all of a sudden it's a new thing to have to handle it, and I've had that happen to me. But and I've had to go figure out and bring people like, how do I make this work? And we all, the treasurers would all be scratching our heads and figuring this out. So it does happen, and I don't know. I wasn't here again a very short time. I don't know, why, how it would go on that long, but it's not the first time I've seen it.
So basically, you're stating keep on top of things. I mean, just like anybody at home doing your balance in your checkbook. If you don't balance it, things are going to get out of whack.
Yep.
And things are going to get worse and worse.
There is the danger that something will get missed that will not be on your general ledger, or not be on your revenue or expenditure ledger, and reports would be given to the council, given to people, management, to make decisions, and they may make a decision incorrect because of bad information. And unless you have cash reconciled, you don't know you have the whole pie. It might be in the wrong spots, but as long as you have it all, then you would notice, budget to actual doesn't look good. This doesn't look right. But if you don't have something that could be, something missing could hurt you.
Yeah. 'Cause I mean, we're here, we're part-time, we all got our lives, we all got our jobs, and sometimes, we're not informed of everything. We're not here 24/7, 8 hours a day. So, and we get hit from the public because they elect us. So we're trying to get them the best answers, and we can't get that unless we get the right information of what's going on. Of course, there's a lot of innuendos and rumors out there that, what's happening to your city, it's falling apart, and it's not good for us, but we got to come back with something. I think this grouping right here and getting together and trying to get it out in the public and to find out, what we have to do, if it's staffing, if it's reports that we have to get in on a timely basis, if it's meeting once a month with our financial people, as a counselors with our committee, or for the full council to let us know what's going on. I think that is vital in keeping, the public informed and to saying that we're not in that bad of a shape. And you stated that tonight, that it was all basically accounting procedures that weren't done properly. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that and appreciate your time coming down here. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Counselor Bartley.
Hi, Mr. Sullivan. Thanks. Nice meeting you. So, Mr. Sullivan, I'm just going to ask a couple brief questions. Internal controls. The internal controls in the city of Holyoke relative to the departments you reviewed, they are in place, they're written. What's your opinion of the city's internal controls? Now, that's one question. And you don't have to answer it. We had a situation where you read in the paper, and we just had a political soliloquy by my colleague because this is a political body, and frankly, I'm proud to be a politician. But we had a situation this past fall where we had, before us, we had a city auditor who said he had developed a system of internal controls relative to a debit card. He, the auditor, said to us that those internal controls were in fact blown. They were ignored. So when we have you talking about internal controls, which is the system that the accountants and auditors follow, step by step. This is how we, two-person signing checks. There's a classic example of an internal control procedure. But during your engagement or just before your engagement, we had an internal control process that was, nobody saw it until we just had an email come in relative to the debit card. We had some oral representation is what it was. So give me your opinion on what the city's internal controls look like now. That's one part. The second part is the process in place developed 100 plus years ago is that for internal controls, we have a treasurer elected, we have an assessor, a tax collector, and an auditor appointed by this body. That was an internal control set up by the city fathers, 100 plus years ago. We now have some debate in the city as to whether that system should in fact remain in place. Should we do away with that system is the question being asked, not by those in the executive branch. Should we do away with that system and just have a kind of a more linear approach where there's this mayor at the top, CFO if you will, and then the mayor appoints, subject to city council confirmation, a person below him to be the head of the finance team. So just to summarize my questions, where are we now with, in your opinion, with internal controls in the treasurer and the audit department? And would you want to opine on whether we should maintain the current system of having elected treasurer as well as an appointed auditor, treasurer, auditor, collector, and assessor? Thank you.
So related to the first, the scope of our engagement was absolutely limited to addressing this situation. We did not perform an internal control review of all the systems of internal controls of the city, or did we even do it even as it relates to the reconciliation process of cash to opine on that. We only got involved in it to understand what the procedures were. We did not review any documents were provided to us about written of how cash is reconciled or cash is recorded through the system. We pretty much had to get most of our information through interviews and actually just looking at the way things were being recorded. So I cannot I do not have an opinion on what the status is of your internal controls. That would be the subject of a different, and probably maybe the external auditors may have a better perspective of that because as part of looking at how the financial
we had a question mark as to what is the discrepancy, because we only heard about a $2.5 million gap, right? That's all we heard about. We thought we had the former auditor come in and say there's looked like there was a gap, and he thought it had to do with health insurance. So I would have thought that, and instead of just reconciling the books, that you would have, again, and if you're saying your engagement for $40,000 didn't include a review of internal controls, but I mean, how do you know, other than you looking over the shoulder of the treasurer and the auditor, how do you know going forward? I mean, at some point your engagement is going to conclude. So going forward, are you going to, as part of this ongoing review, are you going to look at internal controls? Are you going to suggest it? I mean, I heard you suggest them take some training, which I hope they do. I mean, I'm going to look, and I think all of us in this body, when we look at the budget this year, what we're going to see is how much of the budget is dedicated to ongoing training for the finance department and the treasurer's office and in the auditor's office. I think we'll all look at that a lot more closely. Well, I know I will. And I encourage the treasurer and the auditor, the acting auditor, to put in for those kind of funds. I think that's important. But you know, this looking over the shoulder bit, I mean, that's great. But at some point, you're gonna leave town, and so there's got to be a system in place that is adhered to. Are you going to suggest that? Are you going to review what's in place and try to make some suggestions?
Well, I mean, when you get hired for these engagements, they're very specific. We write the engagement letters very specific so that there's no misunderstanding of what our role. My role, my company's role, was not a role to come in and design systems of internal controls related to whatever. You know, we are providing guidance on how to reconcile cash between the treasurer's cash book and the general ledger on a monthly basis. And that's what we're doing. Those are the internal controls that we're involved with on helping the city be able to do that on a monthly basis.
Okay, just my last question then is, you're reporting back to the city. To whom will you report? Either doing a good job, you said, or there's something haywire. Well, let me just put it this way. Will you loop in the city council president and the chair of this committee? Is that possible to do?
That's possible, absolutely.
Okay, so you would commit
I think
to
that makes sense, because
Okay.
I think that's important for everybody. I think the whole transparency thing, and I think that's the feeling that I got from everybody that I was working with in the city, is that we want to be transparent about this issue that was really causing quite a big problem for the city.
Okay, Mr. Chair, one more question. I
You're fine.
sorry. Did you have during this engagement, did you have any interaction with the former auditor?
Yes, we met him right when we started, and we got reports from him.
Josh.
Yes.
I meant
Yeah, we
Josh.
did, yes. Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, so you were able to work with him well?
Well, we worked with everybody. Everybody that we worked with in the city was very cooperative, gave us the information, the assistance, everything we need to be able to do this engagement, yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And just for the record, with Councilor Bartley bringing that up, I was going to announce it with the next two items on the agenda, but our former auditor was invited to come in this evening. I talked to him personally, he did have some conflicts he was trying to work out, but he didn't make any promises. Councilor Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering and hoping that during the remainder of your engagement, you could also, as well as giving the report on the cash reconciliation, ensure that there are written procedures that the staff develop and put in place, not that you would, because I understand that's not the scope of your work, but that you could hopefully ensure that that occurs?
Yes, and we can, if it doesn't, we can report that it hasn't.
Thank you. And I would request that the communications on the monthly reports come to the full city council as a communication through the clerk's office, please, if possible.
If I understand, the future communications.
Yes, the monthly,
Okay.
yes, on the cash reconciliation. Thank you.
The way to come then. Yeah,
Oh, can I
that
just-
is the correct process, which,
Okay.
I'm not saying it happens all the time, but that's the way it is supposed to happen.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that. And I just also want to note that, we've been having financial issues. This is one piece of the pie. There's a number of other issues that we're aware of that are being dealt with in other avenues. But it's fair to say that we've been struggling in the city since the departure of our long-term auditor. Prior to that, we didn't have any of these issues, and we've had instability, temporary staff, people who I think didn't have a full understanding orienting new people who had less of an understanding. So I think there's been a whole combination of events that have happened not in the last year, not in the last 9 months, but in the last 2 to 3 years that have brought us to this unhappy place that we're at today. So I think it behooves us all to get an auditor in place as soon as we can. And I thank this company for their work to at least get us out of last year. I just want to make sure we don't have to do this to get out of this year. Thank you.
Council President.
Thank you. Hey, Dan, thanks for coming down. Just a couple quick questions. I guess, you know, some of the turmoil that has been presented to us has been this debit card issue. And I'm assuming, you know, you guys are based out of Lexington, Massachusetts, correct? Right, so I'm assuming you do this type of work for many communities? I mean, do you see that, is that a normal procedure, that there's a debit card that is used as purchasing options? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
In a certain department, is this for like a purchase, like a P card, purchasing card?
I guess you could ask the folks that are using it behind you.
You know, with the introduction of purchases through either a credit card, debit card, there has to be a system of internal controls, and there should be a policy on the usage of that. I've seen it in some communities. I think a lot of times the finance departments are reluctant to get involved with those, but you know, P cards and debit cards are happening more and more in the future. Everything's becoming electronic, but with changes from the way that it always had been, requires thoughtful structure of policies and procedures. The policies should be written, and then policies are approved typically by the council, and then procedures are built by the administration to be able to comply with those policies. So
Did you see any of those policies and procedures in
no,
place?
I wasn't involved with that at all.
Is that's what your RFP that you only basically kind of looked at the books and the ledger?
We really were called in because of this issue of
What issue is
cash,
that?
the cash not being reconciled. That there was a variance between the treasurer's cash book and the general ledger that internally the city could not resolve.
So, as my colleague pointed out earlier, which I may or not disagree with, you're telling us that it's everything, cent for cent, it's on point.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Sullivan.
Okay, last time, Dan. Based on what you've seen the last couple of weeks, there was comments made by the outgoing auditor and out there about receivership. Do you see the city being in any danger of being on a path that would lead to that or make us in need of that?
You know, I can understand your question. Unfortunately, I'm not the right person to be able to answer that because of the incredibly limited scope of the work that we did. You know, we deal with a lot of these things, but not in working with Holyoke. So it would be totally inappropriate for me to know because there's so many factors to that question. You know, I would say that I was surprised to hear that you were going into receivership. I want to make sure I get my bills in, but no,
The mayor can pay with a debit card tomorrow.
No, he can't.
In a professional manner, with wearing, you know, I don't have enough knowledge, or the work that we did would not lead me to be able to professionally answer such a question.
What type of severe crisis would trigger a receivership?
Reconciling cash, to me, would have nothing to do with whether you're going into receivership or not. It's cash flows, it's revenue sources, it's, you know, being able to meet your your obligations. And so therefore, I wasn't involved at all in understanding what your budget to actuals are, what you're projecting for the future, where you are on your levy capacity, all the different things that are going on. Those are all the aspects that you would be taking into consideration to assess. What's your bond rating? There's so many other factors that come into that play, and that's nothing that I was involved with in looking at, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Well, could you comment on this? The only thing I can think of that would really trigger something like this would be posting a huge deficit and not being able to get out of it.
And that would be from real transactions where you actually brought in less, because you balance your budget, right? And then that would mean that at the end of the year, you got a lot less revenues than you did expenditures, and you didn't have fund balance or free cash to be able to absorb that. That's where you would, and if that started happening over and over, then, and you would be a city. And I've actually worked with cities years and years ago. In like City of Chelsea, there was a time when they were taken over. But that's things that you have to look. That's financial information. That's looking at really. It has nothing to do with we had trouble reconciling our cash.
Right. But
so they're totally unrelated.
Okay, but right now, the books are balanced, right?
Your cash is balanced.
Cash is balanced.
Yes.
So there could be other things out of balance.
Yes, and that's why you end up having a independent CPA firm come in and look at those books. And when you get that audit report, and I can tell you about this, when you get that audit report, they have to follow, because we do too, they have to follow a very stringent set of guidelines put out in order to be able to make sure that your financials are accurate and presented in conformity with the way every city and town, not only in Massachusetts, but in the country, reports, so that then you have the rating agencies look at you and there's a lot of eyes on here. You have debt, and believe me, you would have heard it from someone else before you would hear it from your city auditor that you were in trouble. Because there's a lot going on to look at these. A lot of people are judging, looking, assessing your finances through the whole way it all works within in the United States related to cities and towns that have bonds.
Councilor McGee.
Thank you. One thing, can you email us? I know you're driving home shortly because I don't want you to get a snowstorm. Can you email us a copy of the engagement letter?
Oh, sure. You can get that here too. But yes,
just so we all have it. That's all.
Yep.
Just so we all can read the scope that you keep talking about.
I'll make sure whatever the formal process is of getting you that, I'll make sure it
email it
happens.
to Councilor McGivern, and he can get it out to everybody. The other thing is with regards to number 3, the payroll setting in Munis financial system were set up in a manner that would require additional manual accounting procedures in order to properly account for cash, payroll withholding, so on and so forth. And then you said you changed the settings to make it more user-friendly, or so they can account together. Can you explain that, elaborate on that as to actually what you did and what we're going to see going forward?
Sure. So what the way it was set up was on each payroll, you withhold amounts from your employees for their share of the health insurance, and so when you withhold those, you are acting as an agent for your employees, saying that we're going to withhold these, and then we're going to pay the health insurance companies that are covering you, and so the way it was working with Munis, that it automatically was crediting cash as if you were taking every single person's check and sending it out to the insurance company individually. You know, to put, if I could put it in a way. So it's as if you were just, every single payroll, you sent money off to the health insurance company. Well, that's not what was happening, because you wouldn't pay the insurance company until you got the bill a month later. So it should have been hanging out there as a liability. And so therefore, when I said that you had to do a manual entry, because your accounting system, the way you set it up, was crediting cash incorrectly, you should have been making a manual entry to debit the cash for that exact amount and crediting the liability. And that was not happening. The other piece of what was happening is when the Affordable Care Act came on, and Munis said, if you click these settings off, it will also calculate the amount that the employer is estimated to be paying based on the ratio between employer-employee on the withholdings, and we will calculate that for it. But what happened accidentally is during payroll, it debited expense and credited cash for that amount as if you were sending it out. That wasn't happening. So what happened at the end of every payroll is that we had both the expense, the employer's share, and the employees being treated as if we sent it out. And so that sat there and never got changed. Then you got the bills from the insurance company, and we wanted to pay that. And it's because everything else sort of looked like it already went. How do we handle that? So how do we book cash going out the door again for that, hitting the expense, because then we would have been doubling the expense. And so it got all very confusing. And that's pretty much what happened. And that went on pretty much for a whole year.
Okay, thank you. My question was, how did you redo the settings to?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I answered the first part of your question. I thought you said, how did that happen?
No, I
so
got
the
that
second
the first
is,
time. I just want to know how
so
you
we went into
changed
Munis,
that.
and in the payroll setup, there was a spot for withholdings, and you actually can click off a button that says, don't disperse the cash. And we checked that off on every single type of withholding that was not having money go out the door. And then the part where it says expense it, we changed the account so that it actually just went in and out of the liability account rather than hitting expense, because we did not want to hit the expense at the time of payroll. We want to hit the expense at the time we paid the health insurance bill. So we went in and actually we knew, because I've worked with the Munis accounting system before. We went in and actually just made those changes. And I believe the first payroll since we made those changes was run, or one of the things. And I talked to the treasurer, and it seems to be working with a couple more tweaks, and we might have missed something, is working correctly.
So this was already in the system, you just had to
Yes.
click a button.
You had to know where it was.
Dan, just a follow-up on Councilor McGee. When you very easily describe Munis, I can tell you know exactly what you're talking about, as do most of the people behind you. But can you relate or to the rest of us as lay people, city councilors, your relationship, your company's relationship and understanding of how Munis works, and bring to the table what that means for what this, your analysis was, because a lot of what we do is Munis.
So Munis is a accounting system used probably in over maybe 100 cities and towns in Massachusetts. A lot of cities and towns the size of Holyoke utilize it. It's probably more one of the reasons why it's used. It's a comprehensive accounting system. So they handle your real estate tax bills, motor vehicle. They can handle your utility billing, payroll, purchasing, requisitions, all the different things, and they have every single module. So that's why I think a lot of cities and towns have them. My experience with this, because I've been working for almost 30 years, and when Munis actually was making their big push into Massachusetts, which was in the 90s, I ended up getting involved with helping write the chart of accounts, understanding the system, bridging that gap between a town or a city that had been using maybe the same accounting system for a long time with how Munis would work, and helping them make sure that they can take advantage of all of the aspects of Munis and help them with that. So I got involved in that, and then we do a lot of interim treasurer, collector work, city auditor work, town accounting work, and we end up knowing the system because we are actually users of it. So that's why we ended up knowing this and getting called in just like this to help find things that people just might not know how it works.
Thank you. Councilor Leahy.
Yes, sir. So I just wanted to go back, because somebody had mentioned this is all basically falling on the shoulders of the past auditor. If my memory serves correctly, the last auditor came in, I think he applied in January, received the position, I think maybe in February, maybe started close to March or the end of February. Does that sound correct to you?
I wasn't involved with that.
Okay.
Sorry.
I figured you worked in the office, so.
I just we've been here since December through now. I didn't get involved in how long people were here.
Well, I guess my question then.
So, sorry.
It's just because everything is singular in this, like the auditor. So if Mr. Purcell was here and he came on board and, say the end of February, beginning of March, all of a sudden you have April, May, June. So technically he was only in that position for 3 months of that fiscal year, right?
Sure, yes.
So it seems like people are placing 100% of the blame on one individual when we actually had two individuals working in that fiscal year, right?
Yes, I kept everything just treasurer and city auditor. I don't know.
But it
could have been 4 city auditors. There could have been 3 treasurers. I wasn't involved with.
I think though, sir, in your scope of work, that should have been, because now you have people. It's a very small community, Holyoke, and you have people that like to talk. And I think putting all the blame on one person's shoulder isn't fair.
Which person?
The past city auditor, Josh Purcell.
Oh, but I didn't. I don't mention any name, so I wasn't doing that. If that's being done,
I'm just saying
it's not
publicly. Somebody
coming.
said before we should do this publicly, and I just wanted to say that this one person. There's been multiple people, and I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilor Reagan.
Just following up on Councilor McGee's question. So when you went in and changed the settings, they had been set at in a certain manner prior to that? So in the scope of your review, did you come to understand who in the city has the authority and the access to go in and set and change those settings within our financial management team?
We may have. But I don't know. I can't answer that question right now. No, I don't.
All right. I think that's something that would be important for the council to know.
Okay.
Because whoever set it up, the way it was set up, should have had enough information and understanding to then share how it was set up for then the adjustments that needed to be made.
Sure.
So
And
I
that was
think
probably
it's-
set up like maybe 4 years ago, probably.
Okay, so
So-
I just think it's important to know under which financial role
Right.
that happens.
Yes.
So that going forward, we know who to check with for how the procedures should be set up, how the system should be properly managed to end up with the.
And that is
etc.
that's very important to understand who has permissions to do certain things and have those documented. Yes.
Thank you.
Chair will recognize Brian Smith. Mr. Smith was our auditor for 24 years?
26.
26, I apologize.
Okay.
Thank you and welcome, Brian.
Oh, thank you. Just a historical perspective here. Munis, I actually hired the company. It used to be, originally was called the Computer Center, and they developed the Munis product. Subsequently, years down the road, they sold their company and that product to Tyler Technologies, who's been very successful with it since then. But it was we went active with it in July 1st of 1991. So we actually purchased it probably approximately 6 months earlier, and I and my assistant at the time wrote our chart of accounts. We did the conversion from the old basically manual system that was that was written by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts many years ago to bring it into the generally accepted accounting principles realm that the United States and the world basically uses for its municipal accounting. So I just want to give you a little historical perspective that that's how long we've had it. And I was the super user, as it were, the system administrator for all that time. So any settings that needed to be made, changed, developed, tweaked, whatever, that was me up until I left. So that was it. Just wanted
Thank
to
you.
give you.
Always good to know.
Thanks.
How we doing? I think question and answer period, our presentation is over for Clifton, Lawson, and Hayes. Mr. Sullivan, if that's true, the chair will entertain a motion. The order's been complied with?
Motion that's been complied with.
Motion made second, the order's been complied with. Dan, thank you so much.
Yeah, no,
for
my
both
pleasure
your
to
work,
meet you
but for your
all.
presentation
Thanks so much.
at our level.
Okay.
And
Sure.
I
All right,
thank you for answering our questions.
Have a safe drive.
We have the next two items. At one point, I see them as a similar discussion, and sometimes I read them, I see them as a separate discussion. But they've invited the same people in to talk. Do we want to put them together? Do we want to try to keep them separate?
I think we could put them together.
Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to suspend the rules to take item 3 and 4 together. All those
Motion to combine 3 and 4.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Item 3 is the order introduced by Councilor Lisi to City Council invite our outside auditors, Melanson and Heath, to participate in a conversation with our former city auditor, Josh Purcell, but it's Purcell, right? Purcell. Thank you. Former city auditor, Brian Smith, and our purchasing director who was here but could not stay for the whole evening. And item 4, introduced by our council president, Todd McGee, that the City Council Finance Committee invite in Josh to address the letter of resignation and finances in the city, and also invite in Brian Smith and Dave Martins. And the scope I thought we were looking at was kind of a roundtable discussion, which began with the important part of this evening with the foundation of what the independent audit, or the independent analysis was about, and now I think we can take it a step further and talk about some of the more specifics. I've heard some very good questions come up from city councilors about what I generalize as long-term, and I think this is, as I said earlier, the foundation of getting to a long-term look at everything that we do. I don't believe we can get answers for that this evening. It's certainly welcome to hear thoughts about that this evening, but I think we immediately have to put ourselves in the short-term position to make sure we're able to finish this fiscal year as we look for long-term help. And I can't agree with Councilor Bacon, and I think everybody here, that we need to quickly, get out. And I think Councilor Leahy's committee, the public service, has already started a process of looking for a new auditor. And I'm sure we'll do our best to make that happen in a timely fashion. So with that in motion, we're going to remove from the table for discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Todd, as the maker of the order, did you want to set a format here, or?
No, well, both orders came in at the same time. I filed the order with regards to the auditor coming in, then it was amended by people to add in Dave Martins and Brian Smith, and then it was amended again to bring in Melanson Heath. So they all kind of got amended and jumbled, and then it came out as 2 orders. I'm not sure why, but the main issue was we all received a letter of resignation out of the blue. I think it was on a Friday. Caught us all off guard. No one really had a chance to sit down and discuss with one of our employees as to what was going on. So instead of pointing fingers or having discussions off the cuff, the main thing is to bring in people, sit down, and actually get to some answers. So that was the gist of filing these orders. Bringing in Brian Smith and Dave Martins kind of brought in a perspective of we've seen some turnover in these departments, and try and see what maybe was happening then to what's happening now, to then try and get the processes, if it was better then or better now, to then go forward with a process that makes sense in order not to have to. No offense to Mr. Sullivan, we appreciate your time, but the city can't keep afford going out to pay $40,000 or plus to outside firms when it should be handled in-house. So once again, no offense, we appreciate the work, but we shouldn't be paying for things that should have been taken care of from day one. So for me, let's bring all the parties in. We have plenty of microphones, and just get down to actually what is the best course going forward.
Okay, a practical point of view, if we could ask Bellamy, Pat, if you could come in, and if you want Tanya to come with you, and the mayor, Alex, you want to go from the mic? But if you could come in and join us for, this is a question and answer part, there's no presentation here. This is just in order so we can ask questions. Come on, don't be bashful. Come on in and have a seat at the tables. Bellamy, you love us.
Just get Brian
We
Brian.
I am, Brian, do you feel more comfortable at the tall mic, or do you want to come in and pull up another chair? Okay. And Mayor, you are always welcome at any of our committee meetings at the City Council, especially when we are asking questions. Thank you, Councilor Bacon. No, I won't. We'd like to see you more often. And Sandy, Lori, your presence here is also important. At any time you want to hop in, it's up to Rory, it's up to the mayor if he wants you to speak. I'm not going to go that far, but just please hop in. I think the orders do speak for themselves. We're looking for a roundtable discussion. I know city councilors, I know the public at large has a lot of questions. We just heard a summary of an analysis that's been done over the last few months about the last 12 plus months and what happened and where we're going, more important. And I think the generality of what Mr. Sullivan did was important in terms of what his scope was and what his findings were. We can get a little bit more specific here, but I think the important thing, as I said earlier, the tempo I'd like to see is, all right, this did happen. We understand part of what happened. Where are we going immediately? And is there anything that we're missing in terms of questions that we need to ask, or things that the city council needs to do, things that the mayor, would hope the city council would do, or do we have things that we'd like to see the mayor and everyone do? Now, let me introduce, and I promised I would not butcher this last name. I've met Pat over the years many times from Melanson and Heath. Pat Spulante. See, well, that's because you're a wonderful person to your right. I'm going to say Tanya, I hope. Tanya gave me your card and told me how to roll those L's, but welcome. And I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to what you've heard so far, or you would just like to go into questions and answers. And if anybody's speaking, the microphone, you just hit the button, the green light comes on and you're live.
Could I start?
Bellamy, you may start.
Well, we've heard a lot of discussion of this healthcare issue, and I think that after hearing a lot of people talk about it, not tonight, but before, I can put it together in a timeline of what I understand, how it started and how it has evolved over 4 to 5 years. I believe it started, and I'm glad Brian's here because he can verify that, with the Affordable Care Act and the need to put the employer portion of the healthcare costs on the W-2s. And at that time, it was kind of difficult to do, but Brian Smith and John Lumbert together figured out how to do it. And as has been said by Dan, Munis wasn't really user-friendly to do this, so the expense essentially got booked twice. Once when the system put it on the W-2s, and once when the warrant was paid for the insurance. So the auditor had to and this is a word that comes from Dan's company, trick Munis to thinking that the expense wasn't paid twice, and do some kind of journal entry to correct it. And this is what John Lumber told me, so I want to verify with you that that is correct, that you had to do some entry to offset the sort of double accounting. Is that correct?
There was.
In very simple layman's terms that I've tried to use.
Yeah, generally speaking, that's probably true, but it wasn't abnormal. I mean, it was the normal accounting process that the payroll system recognized as being normal. As if it was going to, as if it was paying the employer share. The employee share, the withholdings were going immediately to a trust.
Right.
So that was correct. There was nothing wrong with that. It was the employer share. So that was showing up on a payroll warrant. And when we see that on the payroll warrant, we know that it was expensed. The only other side to that was it coming from cash? And it was. So we would just take that from cash and put it into the trust as well. And then when the insurance bill came each month, both the employer and the employee share was in the trust waiting to be used to be expended. That bill was paid out of the trust. So there was only one journal entry that was made, and that was just to move the cash amount, and that was it. Other than that, it worked fine.
Which the auditor did, and it worked fine.
Right. Yeah.
Until you left, and although you gave 6 months of time for the city to hire a new auditor, who could then train his successor, your successor, how to do things, including this one transaction, that never happened. And that would have worked okay, except that 4 months later, the treasurer who knew about this transaction also left. So to me, this is what Dan referred to as having that, as being the result of a transition of staff. Because then I came along and I knew nothing about any of this, and I had no one to tell me. And I got through the first year okay. And then at the end of that year, we got some audit comments from Melanson Heath saying things weren't quite right, some balances were off. So I started a process of trying to manage the problem. I called meetings of the treasurer and the tax collector and the assistant auditor. We looked at it. I brought in Melanson Heath to meet with us, and we tried to look at it and fix it, but none of us ever got it right, because we were looking at it as an accounts payable problem, and it was really something triggered by the payroll system, and we just never made that connection. Then along came Josh, and I give him a lot of credit because he figured out it had to do with the payroll system. But by then, it was such a mess that we had to call in, or someone at some point had to call in Dan's company to fix it. But that to me is the history. And the last point is, I believe Munis has changed over the years, and now there's that little box you can click for this not to happen anymore. That's an evolution of the Munis process that's happened over the 4 years. So that's my summary of what I've learned by listening to a lot of things over a long period of time, trying to come to grips with this sort of thorny problem.
Councilor Leahy.
Thank you. I just have a question, and thank you for the historic timeline. If I could ask the representatives from Melanson Heath, 2 questions, I guess. Why didn't you know how to fix that? And wouldn't that have come up in all the audits that you guys performed each year?
So that process change happened in fiscal 17. There was an issue in fiscal 16 as well that we did identify through the audit, and met with Bellamy, and we met with the treasurer and the collector, or not the collector, the treasurer, and Josh, and before Josh Bellamy, to resolve what the issue was. What I think part of the history was, I had actually forgotten, Brian, about the health insurance trust, because that was a fundamental difference as well, and why the warrants were set up the way they were. Because in a trust situation, all that money is going to a separate account, and the account is a trust and it's paying the bills itself. When the trust, because you were self-insured for a period of time, and then that was eliminated, and when that was eliminated and was brought back in-house, I'm not sure if that's when the first settings started to go off. I'm not sure. But, we have had issues in the audit report for a number of years, starting in probably FY 13, 14, having to do with cash reconciliation, and that process not being performed correctly. The last audit that we did was FY 16. One of the issues that one of the services that we do for the city is we do a quarterly cash comparison between the general ledger and the cash book, treasurer's cash book, and identify mathematically, just identify the differences. And through that process, and we do that every quarter, what Dan was talking about with reconciling cash monthly, that is absolutely where you should be. When Brian was the auditor, that was when we started doing this cash comparison, and every quarter there were no differences. There were very limited, normal timing differences and so forth, and minor adjustments that needed to happen. When Brian left, there was absolutely, as you well know, there was a vacuum in that position. And from that point in time, those quarterly cash comparisons contained much larger reconciling items. In FY16, we were able to make the adjustments that were needed for the audit to issue an audit report. Having a clean audit report doesn't mean that there are no variances, there are no problems. So a lot of the issues that were identified were, what was in Dan's report, were adjusted for, or they were small enough that we did not need to adjust for it. So in 16, we had some pretty significant comments about reconciling cash, and about the first two comments are material weaknesses is the terminology, which is intended to convey the seriousness of the comment. And the first two were on cash reconciliation. The second one was on the general ledger postings not being done correctly. So that was from FY16 those issues started.
So that was 2016. Which department, is that the auditor or treasurer's office, or is it both?
An audit is
No, the material, what you just said, I mean, those are pretty strong words.
They are.
So which departments are those?
Both.
That's it for now, thank you.
Time frame. I think I remember the audits. I think most of us, we always get copies of the audits, is when, and this seems to be the health insurance issue. When did this come in play with the state looking at us and saying, we're not going to certify free cash till you reconcile this problem?
I believe that, they told Josh that, end of October, end of November? Somewhere in there, I don't know, that was not I wasn't here when that happened.
I think I can go over that timeline, because it wasn't the state coming to you saying that they wouldn't certify free cash. The problem was, as part of doing these quarterly cash comparisons, what we knew was that there was a difference between the general ledger and the treasurer that we could not identify. We didn't know if there were timing issues on the treasurer's side. We knew about certain timing issues, certainly what Dan was talking about, the warrant, what they call warrants payable, but that large number, that 19 million, we knew about that. We knew there were differences that we could quantify. Some of them, we knew exactly how they would be resolved. Others, we didn't know how they would be resolved. Those adjustments, if you had submitted your free cash, which you could have done, you could have put a balance sheet together, submitted free cash, but when you have those kind of variances, the Department of Revenue's process for everybody, if you say you have a variance, they will deduct it from your free cash. It doesn't matter if the variance is going in your favor or not. If it's a variance, they will deduct for it. So knowing that, we knew that you did not want to submit for free cash when you have these unidentified variances, because they would deduct it from you, which was not bona fide and would land you with very little, if any, free cash. So the idea was, let's get the reconciling items resolved and figure out what they are and figure out what adjustments need to be made so that you can then submit for free cash. So Dan's and Clifton Larson, when they came up with their summary, and they had entries to go along with that, because there were a couple of timing issues that were on the treasurer's side. Nothing unusual or wrong with that, but there were timing issues on the treasurer's side, and then there were a number of adjustments that needed to be made on the general ledger side. Once those were made, then your free cash could be, your balance sheet could be submitted, which happened last Wednesday.
So can you give me a copy of those reports you were speaking of earlier, the ones with the material weaknesses?
Certainly, they're in the management letters. I can absolutely get. They may be on.
We should
file
have,
with the city.
we should have copies in our archives, but if it's easier, maybe we can get them through Pat.
Sure.
Councilor Bacon.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in and giving that explanation. I remember that report from 2016, having looked at auditing reports before and recognizing the importance of a noted material weakness. And there were a number of us, and we have struggled with stabilizing the auditor's position. And there has been fundamental misunderstanding of accounting and auditing since Brian Smith left. So this problem that we're facing here is a culmination of events. I personally give Josh Puschel a lot of credit for putting it out in the open, because I think if he hadn't, we might not even be sitting here having these conversations, and I think this is what will finally get these matters put to rest. I personally believe that when Brian Smith left and when Dave Martins left, there were internal controls in place, followed. They may have been manual, they may not have been, fancy or whatever you may say, but they were functional. So now we may have fancy, but we don't have functional. We have sort of a loosey-goosey, you tell me you want this, I slide the card and you've got it, and then we run around finding the paperwork to back up the expenses. And I hope you will look at that if you are doing our audit this year with great diligence, I believe. And we have had it shared in another committee that state laws are being violated around procurement matters, and that debit card, as the last I knew, has been called upon by the city council to be taken out of service, locked up, and not used until such time as the city council may, which I hope not, at least for any near future, approve the use of a debit or credit card, which was put into use without any submission of anything to the city council until we saw the big Christmas tree out front that got bought out of 2 accounts. So we have a lot of financial issues here. To the gentleman's point, Mr. Sullivan, he was only looking at cash reconciliation. We've had a falling off of the following of basic financial procedures. For whatever reason, I'm not going to get into that, except to say that there's been enough evidence brought before us that we know it. We're taking the steps so far that we have within our grasp to do something about it, but we certainly, as part-time city councilors, don't have the ability to do more than I think what we are doing. I would welcome any feedback from you tonight where you would give us any tools as city councilors that we could bring to bear to do more if we have not, done our due diligence and perhaps brought things to bear that we should. I would welcome that. I mean, we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. But I think when you see fundamental processes in every single department failing, there's a huge system failure going on. So if you have anything to bring to bear in that regard, I would appreciate it.
Councilor McGee.
You said earlier that when doing the audits, if there are variances, it would impact free cash? Or how did you, I want to hear you say it again so I'm on par with it.
Sure. I think when I was talking about or trying to address the reason why free cash wasn't submitted, or that clarifying that the state wasn't the one who asked you to, about requiring these things to be resolved first. So the free cash, it wasn't smart to submit the free cash documents until you had gotten these reconciling items resolved. The variances that were not identifiable, or we didn't know how to adjust them or advise the city auditor's office to adjust for them, because we couldn't resolve them, they were just out there as a difference, a quantifiable difference between the treasurer and the general ledger. And it doesn't make sense to submit for free cash when you have that, because DOR will deduct that from your free cash.
In prior years, did we have variances that weren't reconcilable that impacted free cash?
Yes, but they were, think about 200,000.
Which years were that?
Probably the last, I would say at least 2 or 3. It doesn't have, and it's the same variance because it hadn't been completely resolved.
If it's resolved, do we get that back in free cash?
The way free cash works, it's a point in time. So it's your balance sheet as of June 30th of 17. Whatever then gets corrected or fixed, that, falls into the June of 18 balance. So in a sense, yes, but not in the form of, a check, so.
And you said that you used to do quarterlies with Brian Smith, and then those kind of fell off. Did you request quarterlies again?
No. I still do the quarterly cash comparison.
Yeah, but you used to do
Started
them
doing
with
it when
Brian.
Yes, and
And
my
that-
point was that there was very little, there were very few reconciling items or variances. There were no variances, but there were very few even reconciling items or questions. What we would do, for example, is say, okay, the warrants that were processed on the treasurer's cash book, how does that compare to the warrants that were posted through the general ledger? Just a purely mechanical, comparison. And what we would do is identify, okay, these warrants came out of the treasurer in this month. We're assuming they came out on the general ledger in this month, and then the city auditor's office would verify that. Or, there was some entry in the cash book generally, or in the general ledger, but in the cash book that the general ledger didn't record. So that would get listed. Brian would investigate it. Brian would figure out whether there was a correction that needed to be made or a journal entry that would need to be made. And certainly by the next quarter, those adjustments were all made. When Brian left, there wasn't that knowledge base to maybe interpret the items that were on these quarterly cash comparisons to say, okay, well, how do I resolve those? And that's where it started to fall off.
When you noticed that, did you bring it to anyone's attention?
Yes, to the treasurer, to the city auditors as they changed. And then I believe it was, I'm not sure when we brought it to you, Mayor, but
Yeah, I think it was October,
yeah, I think it was October.
and that's when we moved to hire a CLA as soon as we could.
So when did that change? When did you start reporting it? We found the deficiencies, and then we had to run in October.
Well, I think what happens is, for us to do these quarterly cash comparisons at all, we obviously need data from the city. And there was a pretty good delay between getting the end of, say, June and the time when we actually got the reports that we could even do the comparisons for them. So you have sort of a built-in time lag. And then once we got the reports and we realized that, these reconciling items had been happening each quarter and building. When June came, the hope was that it would have been resolved, because prior to that, we had met with the treasurer and with Bellamy, I think that was you at the time, that was before Josh. We had met to say, okay, how is this gonna get resolved? What's the answer? And I think that was the point maybe where the process changed, how the payroll was being recorded, which then sort of led to a different problem, and I think that's the problem that Dan was looking at with settings, or how this stuff was being recorded on the cash book. So I'm probably confusing the timeline worse than it making it more confusing, but
Well, I mean, one of the issues was that the books didn't get closed until October or so for FY 17.
Yeah, 17.
And so you didn't get the data until the fall, when we were already up in a time crunch where we needed to balance the budget. And so you had reached out to me, and then in turn I had reached out to you, Councilor McGee, as Chair of Finance, and Councilor McGivern, And you said there's no way we're going to file the Schedule A because we have this reconciling item. We've reached out to DOR immediately and asked for an extension, and they told us, if you do it by the end of March, you're okay. Just make sure you figure out the reconciliation before then. But the reason we're on a time crunch is you didn't get the data and the numbers as soon as you could until the fall. And so we really had a short time frame when you're working with us and other communities, and that's why we needed to bring in another firm that could just focus on this item so we could move forward, file the Schedule A, which was done last week, and then move forward.
That's definitely a lot of it. The reconciling items have been building each quarter. It was the same issue. It just, it had to do with this, what Dan was describing of it's being recorded differently between the treasurer and the general ledger. And we could see that those things weren't matching, and they were cumulatively becoming obviously large dollars, that we couldn't see a way that they would be adjusted for. So we had a meeting prior to October with Bellamy and the treasurers and tried to understand and figure out what needed to change in the processing so that the variance could be eliminated and it wouldn't continue. And we thought we had an answer, and it takes the level of deep dive that Dan Sullivan's firm did, the settings and so forth, to actually end up with a correction. So we had, we knew there was a problem. We thought we had a fix. The final quarter came, which could have included sort of the correction for all of that. The quarter ending June came. The correction didn't materialize, or didn't materialize as much as it needed to. And that data we didn't get until probably September, end of September maybe. We put it all together. We realized it's still not working. You still have a large variance. That's when I reached out to the mayor to say, your audit's not going to get done, timely. But you have this major issue. You can't submit for free cash with a $2.5 million variance. You need to hire a consultant, not only because of our time schedule, but we are your independent auditors. We can't come in and change settings. We can't go in and evaluate, and we can evaluate. We can't set up your process. Because you can't set up a process and then evaluate it and then audit it. So there has to be that division between responsibilities. And we've worked with Clifton Larson many times in this similar situations before, and we know what great work they do and that they're very quick when they do it.
Last question. Free cash hasn't been certified yet. We're still waiting on it. I know you got that last email. I think it was it Friday?
We're very close, and the worker that we're working with at DOR is now at a state-mandated 2-day training, and it's likely state offices are closed tomorrow. So the soonest we would get certification at this point is probably Wednesday.
But what was your communication on Friday?
No, I just said that we weren't finished yet. We were going back and forth. I was hoping something would be finished today, and it's not finished. Okay. But he's out, but his boss has been working on it with me today. They go back and forth asking for clarification of this number, and then clarification of the next number. An hour later, clarification of some other number. So it's a serial process.
And within that, are there any variances still outstanding that would impact free cash for us this year?
There's one variance. That one variance of the general fund that you were talking about, that we can't understand what that variance is, right?
Yes, there's a variance in the budget that was approved versus what was posted in the general ledger. So.
What is that?
What's that?
What is it?
We don't know.
We're still analyzing.
Department of Revenue looks at your finances and the balance sheet in 1,000 different ways. And so that was one of the questions, was tying in the budget. So it's not a variance, it's a question from Department of Revenue. So, and they're working on it.
Is there a dollar figure to it?
Yeah. What is it? What is the issue, I guess is the question. And what's the dollar amount?
Well, the issue is, I think what they're looking at is how you did compared to budget, how your actual did compared to budget, general fund, expenditure budget. And one of the adjustments that was made through Clifton Larson's work, earlier someone had asked about what the P&L effect was on all of this, right? And bottom line, it was about $500,000 charge to your health insurance expense line.
An increase.
Yes. And your budget, you're running very tight, obviously, as you, I'm sure know, on your budget. So you didn't have $500,000 in there to spend on it, so that went over. So part of what DOR is looking at, because if you overexpend on your appropriations, it has to be raised. So part of what you're looking at is, or what DOR is looking at is, how does the budget work? You know, whether you can tie to the approved budget.
Didn't we take $500,000 out of health one year to add to the budget? Wasn't that one of the transfers?
We did. Several years ago, yes. That was like 3 or 4 cycles ago, yes.
That doesn't impact it
No,
now?
that doesn't affect this year, no.
Okay.
That was-
From my
making
understanding, there were a number of budget transfers that happened in 17, which is not unusual, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But we don't know what they are, so we're trying to,
We're trying to back into it.
tell me, it's not us.
I know there's other counselors. I'll delay till then. Thanks.
Counselor Sullivan?
Thank you. Pat, earlier I asked Dan about the receivership question, and he said all they did was reconcile the cash account. Are there other accounts right now that haven't been reconciled and have big discrepancies or big variances?
I'm assuming it hasn't changed significantly. In the 16 management letter, we had another weakness related to the receivables, reconciling the receivables. So there is a variance related to your receivables, a combination of real estate, personal property, sewer liens, tax liens, and foreclosures. There are variances there.
And how large are they?
Off the top of my head, I would probably say two or 300,000.
Okay,
Keep in mind, we haven't done the fiscal year 2017 audit yet, so we're just taking information and pulling it together in order to do the free cash certification and basically plug in the numbers in.
I get that. You answered my question on that, 200,000 or 300,000. We're not looking at 2 or 3 million. All right.
Right, no,
Okay.
no.
All right, so the other thing I heard from Dan was there were a lot of other outside eyes that would give us warning signs, in particular bond rating companies. So right now, I keep hearing we have an A bond rating. Now there's A, double A, triple A, quadruple, quintuple A.
Yeah.
What are we?
I'm not the one to,
We're A1, I know that.
Okay, so A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what?
A1, double A, triple A, I believe it's that way. A1 is lower than double A, which is lower than triple A.
Okay, so there's at least 3 ratings that are higher. So just getting an A, if I was to scale that down, we're doing okay. We're not doing that great. Well, let me
I would
ask
just say,
you,
I mean, it's only gone up over the last several years. We were on a call a couple of months ago. It got reaffirmed after some of these issues came up. We had another call. There was no ding or any negative consequence of these conversations. We were able to explain what the reconciliation items were. So at least since I've been mayor, we haven't had a downgrade. We've only had a couple of upgrades in the bond rating, mostly due to the size of our stabilization fund. Some of our material weaknesses are in the revenue, whether it's in the sewer fund. We know a lot of these things already when it comes to expenses versus revenue, what our revenue opportunities are. And we've made some changes together over recent years, but we still have opportunities for both internal reforms that'll send a message to DOR that we're serious about modernizing our financial structure. But also, when we had Cinder and our financial consultant, talked about revenue opportunities, whether it's sewer rate and other things that would put the city in a financially more strong picture to continue the bond rating increases and better annual audits.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. But the A1 rate, compared to, you do this, as I've heard, for quite a few other cities. Can you give me a range? Where does an A1 rating stack up across the state? Is that middle of the road?
I have been doing this a long time, but I do the audit side of it. Your financial advisor, Cinder, is probably the better person to ask. If you're, asking from a financial standpoint, I don't see receivership. I certainly don't see you on the brink of receivership.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. The 500,000 that we just alluded to previously here, now, if that goes against us, it's pretty much going to wipe out any free cash.
If, for example, if free cash would have been 1.5 million, it'll be certified at 1 million. So it will subtract about $500,000 from what our free cash number would have been.
All right, the number I'd been hearing that we were coming in somewhere around 750, is that too low then?
That's after the deduction. But it's still a fluid number. It could be a little bit more than, it could be less than. That's why we've been answering questions the last few days.
Okay.
And then we'll, at some point, hopefully soon, I'll be able to call a special meeting and be very thorough about what the budget balancing options are. But it's too premature at this point to talk specifically about the plan to balance the budget. But we do know we're on a time crunch, and we're hoping to hear from DOR Wednesday, hopefully by Wednesday afternoon, so we can get going without interrupting people's St. Patrick's plans later this week.
Okay, I'm good. Thanks.
Laurie?
Thank you. I'm hearing and have heard that from a purchasing standpoint that some procurement laws potentially may or may have not been broken, and that was brought up tonight. So I am asking, this is the first that I know of it, and that if there is something specific, if there would be a professional courtesy to bring it up to me directly. I'm not aware of anything. I'm not aware of anything specific. I'm hearing allegations, and I would like something specific so that I can review and certainly act on it. Coming up in April will be 2 years for me as the replacement for Mr. Martins. And when I first started, we're talking about staffing and collaboration with new positions. Mr. Martins was in the office for 1 week when I started, and he was there probably less than 20 hours. I had no basic training with him. He showed me a couple things, and I kind of picked up as I went along. I will say that in the right after fiscal year 16, as the city was closing the books, Melanson and Heath did do an audit as part of their outside audit of the purchasing department. They took some files, they reviewed everything, and came back and wrote their audit as the larger audit for the city. When I first started the position, I did ask the mayor that, knowing that my predecessor had an extensive period of time and knowledge in the city, that I kind of wanted to come in fresh, and I had asked him if he would be amenable to having the purchasing department have their own special audit specific to the purchasing department. That was done in 17. And it was not really a deep dive. It went back maybe the last 2 fiscal years covering school and the city. A copy of that report has been provided to the council, and I believe members will be getting copies forthwith. That audit came back pretty good. I think a lot of the issues that were brought up with the audit had to do with the schools being in receivership, losing personnel, everything. There was just a big implosion of activity on the side. So there weren't what I would consider severe red flags, because Melanson and Heath did the purchasing audit. They did come away with some suggestions, one of them being is having a purchasing manual. So while there may be, the feeling that there's willy-nilly and this debit card going around. There are protocols in place, and actually we strengthened up that process, and I believe Bellamy will have more information on that. During that audit, I shared with Melanson and Heath everything that we were doing in the office. And I kind of flowed from what Dave was doing and rolled it into what we're doing now, trying to modernize, make some manageable changes with conserving paper, emailing bids out, and trying just to look for ways to modernize the process. Munis is a very difficult software program if you don't know it. For us, as the finance team, to move forward, we need to be in partnership. I need to be in partnership with my other department heads, specifically the auditor. And I had teed up the ball with Josh on trying to work on some things to modernize the purchasing department. And unfortunately, we're in the state where we're at. I invite anybody to come in and ask me directly what we're doing. I feel very strong that we do follow Mass General laws. I have a direct line to the Mass 30B hotline with any questions. I reach out to colleagues in the area, specifically in Westfield and Springfield, if I do have any purchasing issues, and I feel like the office is very transparent and very much in lockstep with Mass General law. If anybody has anything to the contrary, then I would like to have it brought to my attention versus a supposition or just something brought out so I can address it. I am working with Bellamy. We have strengthened up the procedure with regard to the debit card. The debit card is locked up in the solicitor's office. There have been less than 16 transactions since we've had the card, and we will tighten the ship up. But I do want to just reaffirm that this office has had 2 audits. The first time with the external audit as part of the city audit, and then a special purchasing audit that I had requested when I started the position. I am making some changes. I'm taking the advice and look forward to getting over this hump personnel-wise, and just, keeping the office going forward. I am a very proud individual, and for anyone to think that I have less than clean hands is offensive to me, and I will not sit here and take it.
Sandy, you want to
Thank you.
Is this on? Yes. While Millicent and Heath are here, I would like to just ask them a question. We, as a financial group, which would be Bellamy, and at the time when Josh came in, it was myself, the school department. We have weekly meetings on Thursday, and we make sure that what we're doing is proper procedure. We did ask the outside auditors, and they're sitting here, and they can say yay or nay, what we could do to treat petty cash rather than do for small items online. And they said yes, they agreed that petty cash would be a good idea and that we could use a debit card. I then called my bank and we set up an account that has $2,500 in it, like we have discussed before with the ordinance. Now it's finance. The glitch, again, is the Christmas tree. But keep in mind that every piece of material that was ordered online was spoken for through an object and org and put through GL, and the money was replaced. Now, we have the former auditor here, and I'm sure he can correct me. I've been around for a while. As far as budgets are concerned, if the money is in the budget, the auditor approves it. We may not agree about the Christmas tree, but it was purchased with funds that were available in budgets. And Mr. Smith agrees.
Councilor Lacey has a direct question to Sandy? Oh, is it Leahy?
Leahy.
Yeah. What did I say?
Lacey.
Lacey.
You're the one that said it, not me. Thank you so much for coming down. And so I think the reason you keep bringing up the Christmas tree is because, quite frankly, that's the only thing, at least I knew of. I'm not sure if any other counselor knew of any other items. I just got emailed the list of what I asked for today. So I think that's why people keep referencing the very expensive Christmas tree. You know, maybe the long and the short of it's going to pay off over time, and that's fine. That's not the reason we're here today. But I just want to let you know the reason that it's keep getting referenced is because that's what we knew about. And I'm glad that the Department of Public Works had extra money in their account, because that way they're not going to have to come and ask us for money for overtime for, you know, snow plowing and that sort of thing. So that should be interesting.
Okay.
Right? Go ahead.
I just want to make it perfectly clear that as a financial group, which is now Acting Auditor Bellamy Schmidt, Anthony Soto, we don't make decisions on a whim. We do follow protocol and procedures. And like I said, we don't do anything. If I'm doing something, I reach out to Bond Counsel. We've reached out to the outside auditors, and we get their permission. So I think as a group, we're doing a pretty good job.
And I don't want you to think that I'm saying that you guys aren't doing it. I wanted just to let you know that the fact that, you know, I requested information, took a long time to get it. The only thing that I knew about was that one item, and everything that was on the debit card, I'm sure there's a warrant for, right? And that went to the
Correct.
auditor? Okay.
Yeah.
It's called petty cash. It's reimbursing petty cash.
Right.
Yeah.
So I should get a copy of that too then, right?
And I will just say, I mean, no one that works for the city has anything to hide. Anything that the council requests, we'll send to you. That's why I've been totally supportive of our outside auditors, outside firm. We have department heads that work really hard, and I think the last few months, some of the comments being made, not just by city councilors, but just some of the public, and I'm glad that we're having this meeting tonight, and I think Councilor McGivern opened it up with the right tone, that this is an open meeting, it's transparent, we're here to answer any questions, talk about anything, but I also, as Lori said, you know, will not stand for implications that any of our department heads are misappropriating funds at all. We all love the city of Holyoke, we work hard, we want what's best for the city. I had sent a communication to the city council a couple of weeks ago regarding the Christmas tree, because it seems like there's this special interest in the tree, and I wanted to make sure that no department heads individually were getting blamed. It was upon my request, it was my decision. This year we're going to do a fake tree, and anybody here can disagree with the tree, residents can disagree with the tree. I personally think it's a good decision, and we happen to use it on a debit card. It was purchased legally with money in the budget of Parks and Recs and DPW, and that was actually asked of me under the former term of the city council when I was here to balance the budget. Where'd you get the tree from? I said $5,000 from DPW and $5,000 from Parks and Recs. It was charged to that account. It was in the budget, and it was done accordingly. So there was nothing, you know, done behind the scenes or not transparent. Very open and honest about that. I mean, obviously, I figured people would know there would be a fake tree once they saw it outside. So there was nothing to, at our sense, that we were hiding. And it is an official Christmas tree, thanks to this body. And so, again, I just want to reiterate that we want to work in collaboration with the city council. I think there's been a couple of hiccups as we've discussed tonight, but everyone's been committed. Everyone who's been working for the city, committed to solving the problems and moving forward. You know, as Pat said, we're nowhere near receivership, and the implication that would even be true is completely false. I mean, we had our financial consultant in here, Cinder, a couple of years ago, who said the city is living within its means. The budgets I've put together over the last 7 years have grown at less than the rate of inflation. We've grown our stabilization fund by over $2 million while maintaining and growing city services. And so, you know, we're solving this important issue of reconciliation. Hopefully within the next week, we'll be able to balance the budget, set the tax rate, and move forward and begin working on the budget for FY19. But again, as Lori and Sandy said, there are people in city, because more counselors develop those relationships, pop in, say hello, make those phone calls. Those develop really lasting relationships and communication where it's not as if, you know, we need to find this out or we need to explore this conspiracy or what is somebody doing with this money. Everybody wants to work together and do things based on procedure, and I think sometimes it affects the morale of people in City Hall when there's this implication that somebody's trying to hide behind closed doors or meet secretly about a Christmas tree. That's not the truth. I mean, we're here for the city because we love the city, we want the city to be successful, and we want to work with everyone here to move it forward.
My opening remarks almost said, or almost going to include that we will not talk about the Christmas tree tonight.
Believe me, I could have bet
I'm not saying
$100 it was
it's
going to
not
come
important.
up.
It is. I'm not saying, but the ordinance committee's been discussing that in relation to the debit card, and
I almost had it installed for tonight, but
it just, I think whether we agree, disagree, have differences about the money and the tree itself, that is not the problem, what we're talking about tonight, because that is accounted for.
Yeah.
Whether we agree or disagree at where it came from. Can I get an object code for petty cash? Can someone explain to me how petty cash works?
It's a balance sheet account, it's just a form of cash.
Where's the money coming from, though?
Well, it goes from cash to petty cash.
Where's the cash, where's the appropriation that initiated in our budget process?
It's not an appropriate, you're not spending any money, it's just on the balance sheet as a.
Mike's on.
Bellamy, could you hit your mic, please? Yeah.
It's a balance sheet account on an expense account. So you take $2,500 worth of cash out of the bank account and put it in another bank account that's called petty cash. And then when you actually when you draw it down to spend something, then it becomes an expense.
And it goes through the warrant process?
And goes into the general ledger as an expense, yes.
And what?
But
I guess he's asking what line item in the budget
What
would
rules?
that come from?
Well, I don't think there is a line item.
no,
think
there's
that's
a
what you're
line item
asking,
on the
though.
balance sheet for petty cash, but not in the budget, no, because it is it's a cash item.
What rules do we have for petty cash? Do we have rules for petty cash?
No, because it went from 25 to 10,000.
I don't know. I don't recall any limit. There must be something in the financial policy manual, and I don't recall.
Hey,
You'll recall.
I'll tell you right now, the man that's coming to the mic hates
He'll know.
petty cash.
He'll know.
Okay, and I learned this a long time ago. So I was trying to ask my questions nicely without getting Brian up, but Brian, can you answer that?
As best I can, yes. There were approximately 15 total petty cash funds spread out around the city. Probably half of them were up at the school department. The others were spread out around various departments that would need some day-to-day small amount of cash. I think the largest was probably $500, maybe up at the school department's main office or the high school, one or the other. The others were $50, $25, all that sort of stuff. Probably in total, they may have been about $2,000. That's rough, off the top of my head. That's 4 years ago now, but that's approximately what it was. It's not ideal to have a lot out there. That's why you try to put some controls over it, which we did. We had a list of petty cash accounts. Who was personally responsible for them, not just a department, but a person who signs off personally responsible for that money. So if there's a difference, they have to come up with the difference out of their pocket. They are personally responsible for that. There were annual and sometimes more often, but normally it was like annual surprise counts that we would do. We would go to each one of their offices and tell them to pull out the petty cash drawer. We would sit there and count the pennies, dimes, nickels, dollars, receipts, and if the total didn't come up to the amount that was allocated to them, then that difference either came back to the general fund, or if it was over, if it was under, then that person had to come up with the difference. It was very, very rare that there was a difference. Very rare, and if there was one, it was very minor. In my experience here, so yes, they all did have. There was a petty cash, just a one-page petty cash process, policy, as it were, procedure as to what petty cash was and how to use it. That was pretty much it. Whether each individual person or department, kept all of that paperwork, the procedures or whatever, that was up to them. But it did exist because I wrote it. So, and it was distributed.
Thank you. Sandy?
So in one of our meetings, especially with the school department, the new financial manager, Anthony Soto, was not comfortable with anybody having cash. So this is what we came up as a solution. Anthony Soto was in charge of that debit card. Lori Belanger is in charge of the city one. So we don't have that issue with money hanging around, somebody stopping by, taking it from a drawer, and then that person's responsible for replacing it. I have total access to look at it online, so if there's an issue, I automatically get a reminder from the bank also, because we have a great bank that oversees our accounts. So there is never any fraud involved with this way of doing it. So it's just a different form of using petty cash.
Sandy, it sounds like different numbers too, though, from what was and what is today.
The thing is, we, as the treasurer, I'm the one that set the limit, the 2,500. They, other than, we're not going to mention it, the only time.
Thank you.
That, because when you look at what has been purchased, they're very small purchases. There's nothing that goes over 2,500. It's small items like we've discussed at the ordinance meeting, going to Target and getting a phone because the phones were out at the DPW and they needed something to communicate. These are the things that would make this a lot easier. If you were to put in a rec, and Brian can testify to this, the process is a little longer than just a day. You can get the piece of equipment in your hand, put the rec in, knowing that you have the money in your budget, and the auditor will sign off on it.
Key, knowing the money's there.
Correct.
Councilor Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in response to earlier comments made relative to my comments on proper procedures around expenses and in compliance with procurement law, my comments are based on the public meeting that was held in Ordinance Committee. And my comments are based on the fact that in that meeting, our procurement officer stated that in order to get a debit purchase made, an individual, a department head, would come to her office, make a verbal request. She would use the card and make the purchase, at which time the money was withdrawn from our accounts. The purchasing regs require an authorization and a signature on availability of funds before funds are withdrawn from an account. So if money is being directly withdrawn from an account without any signatures, any documentation that the funds are available to be withdrawn, that is not in accordance with procurement regs. That is what my comment is based on. It's in the public record. It's recorded. And there was information provided at that public hearing that the regs require that the documentation and signatures of the appropriate financial people are required prior to the purchase. And that these documents have to be written. You don't make the purchase, take $10,000 out of the bank, and then go and get the documentation and figure out which object codes they're coming out of. And that's just basic procedural issues, and that's what I'm speaking to, regardless of what was purchased. And so my comment around the mayor taking responsibility for the purchase is, I'm sure you did authorize the purchase because the department heads couldn't go in and say, I want to spend $5,000 on part of the Christmas tree and I want to spend $5,000 on the other part of it. It was a $9,997 or whatever it was amount that was withdrawn directly from the account. So that much is clear, but my comments are specific to proper procedures being followed. And it's on the record that they have not been followed. And our goal here is to, and I think Councilor McGivern has said it very well, get back to basics, follow basic fiscal policies. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't even have to be modern. It just has to happen in the proper order and have a paper trail. And that's part of what is missing. And for our committee, I understand, Councilor Leahy, you said that you received the information that you asked for. I'm still waiting for bank statements on the debit card.
Well, so I got an email or text from Rory saying that they couldn't find it in the mayor's office, but then I talked to Brenna and he said they sent it back without being signed. And then somehow I got emailed. I'm not sure who emailed me today. I haven't had a chance to look at it.
But have you received the statements that you requested?
I don't know. I was looking on my small little iPhone,
Okay.
and
Okay, I
eyes aren't
haven't
as they
yet.
should be.
I've received some of the information, but I haven't received the bank
Bank
statements.
statements?
I have not received
No, I'm
those.
not sure
Do we
who-
know which bank it is that they'd be coming from?
It's People's Bank, and I am in the process of blacking out a lot of the banking information because I do not want the city to be compromised on accounts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'm not sure, but I think the Hoyoke Police Department is telling us to move any cars outside or on the wrong side of the street.
Yeah, I told them there's a bunch of city councilors' cars out here.
We're in the parking deck. Where are you?
Are they doing that?
Thank you, Councilor Bacon, and I think back to basics is the theme that I think we all, are buying into, and I think we're gonna get there. Again, short-term, foundation was laid tonight. We got some work to do as soon as we find out the free cash special meeting and some work to do there. Can't say it enough, I think we all know we have to work very hard, and Council Leahy is on top of that with the Public Service Committee. The ads have already gone out for the looking for candidates to fill the auditor's position, which I think is a key.
Joe?
Mr. Smith,
Thank you.
are you coming out of retirement? Sorry.
No comment. On that note, I understand that the charter calls for a residency requirement for the position of city auditor. I will say, though, that, and I don't know if there's any way to supersede that through some vote or what have you. That's more your area. But as you can see, this position of city auditor requires a highly technical person, someone who really understands the state laws that relate to municipal finance, financial accounting as it relates to fund accounting, not-for-profit accounting, municipal accounting, all that sort of thing, banking, and computers, specifically Munis, because it is a complex, it has grown to become a very complex system. So what you're looking for is going to be somebody who's probably not in the city right now, first of all. And if you were to find someone outside the city who has that kind of experience, say a current city auditor or town accountant somewhere else, to incentivize them to come here would be extremely expensive. I'm sure it probably would be a lot more expensive than it would be to pay them what they're really worth to do this highly technical job. So I would say my recommendation as a citizen at this point is to find somebody who has the requisite experience to sit in this seat, regardless of where they live, regardless of that. That's just as a citizen, I think that I'm looking for my money to be protected, my tax money, to be as protected as possible, to be reported accurately to you and to the mayor so that you can make accurate financial decisions on a timely basis and a consistent and be reported on a consistent, accurate, and timely manner. That's what we're looking for here. And you're gonna need somebody who already walking in the door has that experience. And like I said, I'd be very surprised if you haven't by now found somebody who would step forward that has that experience, that lives in Holyoke already. I think you're just gonna have to try to find some way to supersede the residency requirement.
A point well taken, and I want to turn to Councilor McGee, who has heard you loudly, to answer that.
And I think the mayor's going to jump in it too.
Sorry.
We filed it, or I filed the order last meeting. It was sent to Charter and Rules to deal with that specific issue, take care of the residency requirement. I have the same issue that you have in the sense of, not saying there's not talent in Holyoke. We have great talent in Holyoke. The real issue is the specific talent you're talking about. We can get in Westfield, Springfield, wherever else to come here, not far commute. My question would be to you, Brian, because you're here tonight. It's 9:05. Whoever we appoint, could we, in essence, bring you in? I'm not sure if there's, I'm not saying petty cash, that we can hire Brian to sit with them for a little while. We missed that opportunity. Be full disclosure, we missed that opportunity when you gave us plenty of notice.
Yep.
Is there a way, and since the mayor's here, to make that commitment to say that whoever we hire, we at least bring you in for whatever we can, a nice low number, to help train them and get them accustomed to the way. We just saw one mistake tonight, and it's not a mistake. It's a different way of viewing. I want to be really clear. No one's made a mistake, and I've said that message loud and clear. We're not going to pick on anybody. The issue is correct the problem, move forward. If we remove the residency requirement as fast as we can through a charter rules, then turn to the mayor to have him help out, can we look to you to have you come in?
I suppose only if the mayor is willing, because it probably would be him that would have to
As always.
approve of that or what have you. So
I
would be very willing. I mean, I like I said, I have a vested interest in this in you know, in ways as a former employee. I'm looking to have, you know, the health insurance and the pension and all that sort of stuff, you know, protected, those areas in particular. That I'm very selfish about that. I have a vested interest in that, as well as my tax money. I want to make sure that it's properly taken care of. So yeah, I would certainly consider that.
Mayor, you're on the spot.
Well, I'll address that. I had some other points to make first. But no, I do want to echo what Brian was saying before we got into that conversation about the residency requirement and his points about the position of city auditor is very particular around municipal finance. So even if you find someone in finance outside of municipal finance, it's a whole different world. Dan and I, who is still here, I guess it hasn't started snowing yet, you're still here, we're talking earlier. I mean, the lieutenant governor specifically appointed a commission to recruit and train more people in municipal finance because there's a shortage of people getting into municipal finance. So that's an issue we have here with the residency requirement, and also related to the issues around salary. I don't think we're competitive enough to pay someone, particularly if they have to move here. So I think that's an issue. And, you know, Brian and I worked on a few budgets together, and I think we all could agree that, you know, we didn't have to micromanage or worry much about things being accurate all the time. And I really appreciate Bellamy's leadership over the last, 2 to 3 years. And I remember when I first reached out to him, I told him, you know, it's probably only a couple of month gig. And it's turned into 3 years. And one of the challenges the last few years is, you know, I can't, because it's not my appointment, go out and recruit top talent and to say, I'm not sure how long you're going to be here because I'm not sure when the council is going to actually bring in someone. So I can't expect someone to leave their job or whatnot. And so I think this is an opportunity to get it right. I do think there may be an internal candidate that is knowledgeable of finance and of munis, but there may not be the right person. I also think it's an opportunity, and Councilor Bartley spoke to this earlier. It wasn't my official recommendation to create essentially a consolidated finance department and a CFO. I mean, the DOR has been coming into cities and towns that have antiquated charters for the last decade and making recommendations. And back in 2015 or maybe even 2014, the DOR came back and issued recommendations to all of us saying, you know, it's archaic. We should move forward with a centralized finance department, a CFO. I want to be held accountable. I am the CEO of the city, but I do think, you know, we can explore in the coming weeks some sort of middle ground to protect council appointments for finance department heads, but also give the mayor a little bit more involvement in appointing those folks and potentially creating a CFO position that oversees other financial department heads. And that CFO can also serve as the auditor. So I think given that we're in this moment of transition where things have been relatively cleaned up for the foreseeable future, an opportunity to have a serious conversation about the finance departments. In terms of whoever we bring on, I mean, Brian has a lot of institutional knowledge, and obviously I would support making sure that everything is done accurately and correctly. I think, Brian can certainly help with that. Bellamy has always offered to help. When Josh came on board, Bellamy was a phone call away and in the office helping with that transition, as was Katie Jakowski, who served in that acting role. And Katie is our resident expert on munis here in the city. I mean, she knows how to do the formulas. She knows inside and out. So we have a lot of great talent here and a lot of great resources. And I think the bottom line is we all want to work together to make sure that everything is happening as it should be.
I think if nothing is said here this evening that makes any sense, it's Katie Jakowski is our future, and we all got to recognize that. Anything else? We got to start wrapping this up because some people still have to travel. You're going the other way though, right?
Yeah, we're a lot closer to Jan.
Yes. Anything else on these two orders in particular? I'd just like to make a closing statement. Thank you to everyone that's participated this evening, and I think it's important we did this both with the financial team of the current city. It's always nice and maybe a little bit unusual, but to have the past present with us, especially Brian and Grouchy David, even though he had to leave. And those that are filling in, you know, it's all important, and the perspectives that have been offered from Melanson and Heath, that, you know, are more in depth from the. And there's a difference between an audit and an analysis, I guess, is we didn't really say that this evening, but it is important to recognize that. It's important. The foundation's been laid. Short term, we know we got to get that free cash number. Special meeting, a lot of things to do. Short term, I'm going to file an order. I got a couple co-sponsors to raise the sewer rate. I'm sorry to everybody who just heard that for the first time, but we are using property tax to pay for our sewer plant, and that is just plain wrong to everybody. We'll work on that to try to balance that out. Mike is DPW. Mike is working on the numbers on that right now. Long term, what I do propose, I don't know if we'll file it for this week, is that we do form a committee that can look at these, part of what you just said, Mayor, part of what we've been saying, and part of what we know from the DOR report, which is getting old now. I sat with the mayor last week, and in 1991 as the acting mayor, I used to sign these warrants, Brian. Remember that stack he would send over? I said, the mayor's got to sign these weekly. He said, well, sometimes twice a week. And I said, I got to read every one of them, which I did. You know, as a naive young kid back then. So I said to the mayor last week, so that's all electronic now, right? And he said, no. And I said,
look over there.
I said, come on. And then he said, Roy knows how to sign my name, so it's like.
This is where.
But long term, I think we start with a committee with key people and invite people from at large to join us to look at some of these. There are some charter issues, there are some ordinance issues, but we all have this at stake. And Mayor, I understand the differences with our appointments and you as the CFO, the CEO, but we've gone to great lengths, and we will tweak it if we have to, because you are the day-to-day manager, because you don't want the 13 of us becoming involved in day-to-day management. You know, and I know it's difficult when appointments you can't discipline directly, and you certainly can't hire and fire, but we'll work on that to make that more smooth if it needs to be. If there's anything else that needs to be, Councilor McGee.
Sorry. Since they're here, before sending them away, item 7 was the communication from the Department of Revenue. Would that relate to this? Would the outside auditors have or mayor have a follow-up, just so we know where we are?
That was just an official notification letting us know that we didn't file our Schedule A. It's courtesy. We were expecting that notification because we know we haven't filed it because we were waiting for the report. They accidentally emailed it to the former council president, and then I emailed them back and said, please email it to Todd as well. So
I deleted it. But you're all set with that as well?
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay.
Anything else? And Bellamy, can you hang around? We got one more item. I just want you to go on record what you told me the other day about that transfer. It only take 2 minutes. All right. Chair will entertain a motion. We can go a couple ways with these. Motion that these both orders have been complied with. Again, thank you to everybody. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. We do have a couple items left. I think we can dispose of them very quickly. Item 5. If we could just skip to item 6 real quick. Linda, you going to be here for a minute? Item 6 is introduced by myself. It was sent back by the City Council after this committee recommended. At that time, Josh Pischel had asked for a transfer of $2,400 from office supplies to temp seasonal. Bellamy, you and I talked about this the other day, that Josh was looking to pay, I think, either Bellamy or someone that was coming in to help him out. Is this transfer still needed? Are we, okay, so we can just,
Motion to deny.
Proper motion is to deny, which we will vote it down at the city council meeting next week. If there's no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Our recommendation will be to deny. Thanks, Bellamy. Linda, we need your input on this. It's item number 5, that any department head who approves for an employee who has exhausted all paid benefits for a non-work related injury or issue be required to have written approval by the mayor and an approval transfer or appropriation from the city council. Councilor Bacon, if I could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason I filed this order was because I was requesting of legal some information around the transfers. And based on a sort of separate discussion that I was having, she let me know that each department head has the authority to authorize pay for non-work related injuries on their own discretion. So I said, well, how would that be coming through to the council on transfers, or would it be coming just out of the regular salary line being paid like they are there? And she didn't really know and referred me to the department heads. Well, it's not a reasonable thing for me to be able to contact all the department heads to see what they're doing. But at your last meeting, when Sergeant Hart was here, I did take the opportunity to check with him. And so he clarified for us what happens in their department, where they have a voluntary bank that people can donate to and they help each other out, which I think is a very good thing. But it seemed like it was unique to that department. And what I'm just looking, I was actually looking initially for assurance that people getting paid out of the injured out were really injured. And so the police department affirmed that for everybody that's on that transfer list, they have a work assessment formal process that feeds into that line. And so that is how my order came to be filed, because I didn't really know what was happening, and neither did the legal department. And I didn't appoint myself to checking with all the department heads. So I put it forth to the committee in this way.
Okay.
So, I mean, the bottom line is, I just want, if there is authority for department heads to pay people who are injured, not work-related, and if they do have that authority, okay, but then where's the money coming from and how is it authorized?
Okay.
And if they don't, just to clarify it, because I really don't know.
Suggestion that we would, through our administrative assistant, get this out to department heads and maybe get reports back. Okay.
That would be reasonable, I just,
Now, I heard you say it. My understanding is a sick bank is pretty well practiced everywhere, state level, city level. I know the school department practices it. We heard the police department, I think, told us they have a sick bank.
that is
And-
donated from each employee
Yeah.
to the bank.
But ones I'm familiar with, where I work, the limitations are very clearly spelt out. And obviously, one employee gives up a sick day, another employee takes advantage of it, and it works good, and vice versa. But do you want to explore that too, or just?
I mean,
I've heard other things, but I'm not sure.
yeah, I just want to make sure there's just policies and procedures in place, and that everybody's treated fairly and equitably, throughout, that's all.
Okay, so.
I just have a legal question on that, Joe.
Yes?
If the procedure is different from the norm, then are we opening up ourselves to liability in a union negotiation, since that we went outside the scope for someone else for something, and now we have to offer it up to others? You'd have to be really careful there. And I compare that to like a qualified sick pay plan in the industry that I work in. If you don't have one of those in place and someone goes out on sick leave and you offer it up, then due to the laws, you have to offer it up to everybody. Now, I know the municipality is a little different from those type of rules, But the question would be is in union negotiations, if someone has done something outside the norm, does that now put the city at liability when they say, well, you did it for one person, we want it now in our union contract for all? That's where I think the slippery slope could go, and that's why I think where we need legal as well to kind of get involved, this, you know.
I think along those lines, if I'm hearing what's being said, that we would refer a copy to legal to get their input on exactly what Councilor McGee said. Refer a copy, I hate to say to Human Resources because we know our director is about to retire, but perhaps a copy to the Human Resources and Treasurer's office to find out if they monitor a sick bank or if it's up to the individual department head to monitor the sick bank. And then if there isn't a specific criteria of how to use a sick bank, how to monitor a sick bank, then perhaps our next human resource director would be able to put one together. And I could give some guidance in that area because I know in our case it's union, Todd. It's very positive, but very strictly monitored. So is that fair?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so
I
the actual
appreciate it.
order will lay on the table, but if we can, with those 3 amendments, just refer it to Human Resources, the Treasurer, and the Law Department.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So move. Ryan, I hope you got all that. And the last, we do have the letter which we just discussed. I guess we could report back that it was complied with an answer from Melanson and Heath that it will be taken care of by the 23rd.
23rd, yeah.
Schedule 8 will be filed by the 23rd. On that motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We still have other items in the jacket. Real quick, I thank the committee for allowing for this meeting tonight. I think it was, okay. Next Monday is out of the picture.
Yeah, I'm just.
No, but someone's already got it.
Yeah.
The 26th or the 2nd?
26 is DGNR already. I'm on that committee, so we have a meeting that night.
April 2nd?
Before our next meeting, right?
Yeah.
Sounds
I,
good.
I would rather April 9th, but
April
we'll,
2nd's a Monday, we can do that.
yeah. April
It's
2nd,
Easter- Go ahead.
is it the day after Easter?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, it
big
is,
deal.
I think we can go to April 9th. If April 9th will be the regular scheduled meeting, is that all right? All right, April 9th. If there's anything really important, I'll try to sneak a meeting in before the April 3rd meeting, full city council. But I think we'll go get everything on the agenda for April 9th, Ryan. I'll put it in the book. On a motion to adjourn, any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? We stand adjourned.
We're gonna go, see you guys later.
Yeah, have a good one.